Well, thanks everyone for attending, and many thanks to the organizers for putting together what I'm sure is already an excellent conference and will continue to be so over the next few days. Okay, so my talk is about a specific genre of scientific philosophical writing whose origins trace back to Aristotle and the early Peripatetics, but which had many inflections in different historical contexts throughout the Middle Ages as well. The talk will go something like this. First, by way of background, I'd like to give a brief description of the ancient Greek Problemata physica tradition. Then I'll survey the medieval receptions of that ancient tradition with a focus on the Arabic reception, but also an indication of what is extant in Syriac and Hebrew. And finally, I will present a newly discovered Arabic text from the 9th century that belongs to this tradition and which shows the extent and manner in which this mode of scientific writing became naturalized in the medieval Islamic context. So the genre we're talking about is known commonly as Problemata physica, or sometimes just Problemata. It is the corpus that is referred to as the problems amount to the third largest work in that is attributed, that belongs to the corpus of Aristotle. It consists of 38 books, over 900 chapters, and the distinctive feature of this text is that every chapter begins with a question, usually the interrogative why, followed by one or more answers, sometimes provisional answers, and sometimes also follow-up questions as well. And the questions often use this kind of paradox. Why does phenomenon X have effect Y, but phenomena XA does not have effect YA? The range of subjects covered is vast and varied, from medicine to natural philosophy, astronomy, meteorology, music, ethics, and everyday topics. This work, the Problemata, is often referred to as a pseudo-Aristotelian text because it is not a unified and singular work of Aristotle. It is rather a peripatetic compilation that mostly depends on the works of Aristotle, Theophrastus, Aristotle's successor at the Lyceum, and later Peripatetics. Specialists of the ancient Greek tradition generally agree that while some of the chapters and some of the books likely were written by Aristotle, and that he may have himself directed the compilation of some early versions of the work, he certainly did not write the whole work, and certainly not the collection as we know it today. Indeed, the heterogeneous and variegated nature of the collection, including frequent repetitions, contradictions, across the collection of texts, strongly suggests that it is a compilation of material that took place over time and produced by multiple actors. Okay, that's what I'd like to say about the ancient Greek tradition. Now, that tradition was received in many different historical contexts, including medieval Latin world, and for our focus today, the medieval Islamic world. That took place through vehicles of translation, which was part of a broad-spanning effort to translate systematically scientific and philosophical works from ancient Greek into Arabic that took place in the 8th and 9th century. The Problemata were part of this broad translation effort. In Arabic, the title of the text was often translated as Kitab Mabal, the Book of Why, referring to the structure of the work around questions, but also sometimes translated to natural philosophical questions, Masail Tabi'iyya in Arabic. This, as I mentioned, was part of a broad-spanning effort to translate Greek scientific and philosophical works into Arabic. That translation often took place through Syriac intermediaries, and it may have been the case for the Problemata, but as I mentioned, given what is extant, we can't really be sure. Some works during this process were translated more than once from the same Greek source or from different Greek recensions. In some cases, translations were substantially amended and redacted, and therefore circulated in distinct versions. Fortunately, some of the translations produced during this period are relatively well preserved, such that we can gain a reasonably clear picture of the various translations, retranslations, and redactions. A good example of this is On the Moving Sphere by Autolycus of Perga. At least 3 translations were made in the 8th and 9th century, and subsequently at least 2 recensions were made in the 13th century, all in Arabic. And most of the texts of this tradition have reached us in at least one complete manuscript. Unfortunately, this is not the case for the early translations of the Problemata Physica. We do not know the extent or number of translations produced, and it is only in some cases that we have a reasonable idea of which Greek sources were used to produce the medieval Arabic translations. The case of the Problemata Physica is further complicated by several factors. First, that the Problemata Physica are not the only such compilation that existed in ancient Greek. Several other such collections existed and circulated in Arabic as well. Second, the question and answer form was widely popular among scholars of the Islamic world across scientific and philosophical disciplines. And finally, as we will see, there is the fact that large parts of the Problemata Physica were adapted by authors writing in Arabic for different purposes. Okay. So that's what we don't know, unfortunately. Let's survey what we do know about the Problemata Physica. So here's just a summary slide, and I will go over some of these points in detail. A large collection of Problemata attributed to pseudo-Aristotle are extant. A small collection of what was known as Problemata Inedita, but has recently underwent something of a name change, often attributed to pseudo-Alexander, but recently been argued that it can be attributed to pseudo-Aristotle as well. A small collection of such texts in Arabic is extant. We have adaptations and recensions that cannot be said to be direct translations of the Greek, but are still nevertheless connected to the Greek originals. And various quotations and commentaries in a number of works. Okay, so I start the full collection that is extant. We have one nearly in Manisa, Turkey. It comprises 372 questions divided across 17 chapters and 3 books. In the manuscript, the translation is attributed to Hunayn ibn Ishaq, which we see here on the title page of the manuscript. I'm not sure if you can see where the arrow is pointing, but it is attributed to Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who was a prolific translator of Greek scientific and philosophical texts into Syriac and Arabic. He was active in the 9th century. The manuscript itself, however, was produced much later, and some scholars, notably Manfred Ullmann, have brought into question the attribution to Hunayn, and we'll see one of the reasons for that in just a minute. At least 4 of these 17 chapters comprising this volume were translated from Arabic to Hebrew in the 13th century by Moses ibn Tabun, who belonged to the famous family of translators. This partial translation is extant in at least 3 manuscripts and corresponds to books 1 through 3 of the extant Greek Problemata. In terms of content, the relationship between the extant Greek compilation of pseudo-Aristotle and the translation that we are referring to here can be summarized as follows. The questions posed are similar, but the answers are different. In general, this may be due to the fact that translations were based on a collection of Greek problemata that is fundamentally different from the extant one. While this may be true regarding some chapters in some books of the collection, it's unlikely to be true regarding the whole collection. The more likely scenario is that the translator or translators amended the answers to bring them into line with the scientific views of their time. This means that some of the answers in the Arabic Problemata Physica are decidedly non-Aristotelian, and that the translator's role indeed went beyond providing rote translation. It's distinctive to the Arabic translations of the Problemata Physica, since in most other cases, early Arabic translators aim to faithfully render the Greek text. That is not to say that there is not substantive difference between the extant Greek text and the medieval Arabic translations. Rather, the degree of difference is typically less than what we observe regarding the Greek and Arabic versions of the Problemata Physica. This is an excerpt of one spread in the manuscript, and we see, just to point out some of the features, some of the questions rubricated with an overline red ink, and then the answers given in the text block as well. For those who are interested, the questions in this particular spread start with Lima Sara, which is one of the formulas used to effect that question and answer format. Okay, that Manisa Codex is basically the largest complete collection that is extant. Related to this is a standalone manuscript of chapter 10. This corresponds to chapter 10 of the Greek Problemata, but in Arabic corresponds to the 11th chapter. The manuscript held in Tehran attributes the translation not to Hunayn ibn Ishaq, but to another 19th century translator, Thabit ibn Qurra. And it is one of the reasons that Manfred Ullmann and others have cast doubt on the attribution of what is extant in the Manisa Codex to Hunayn. In this case, it should also be noted that the text is not identified as a collection of problemata. Rather, it is identified as being a compendium of Aristotle's Book of Animals. Of course, that in Arabic is Jawama Kitab al-Haywan in the first line there. Kitab al-Haywan in Arabic is the title of 3 works of Aristotle related to zoology, which in the Greek tradition are distinct works, but in the Arabic translations were compiled into one volume. It was noted by Remke Crook, who first discussed this particular manuscript, that chapter 10 of the Problemata Physica occupies a unique position within the pseudo-Aristotelian tradition. No other chapter of the collection depends so exclusively on the works of Aristotle. Almost every item in chapter 10 can be traced back to one of Aristotle's 3 zoological works. So in giving this particular manuscript this particular title, the Arabic translator, or whoever it was, who wrote the title may have wished to reflect a close relationship between chapter 10 of the Greek Problemata and the zoological works of Aristotle. And this is just a sample page from the manuscript, which is dated to the 7th century in the Islamic calendar. Okay, just moving along. So we have the Manisa Codex, we have the Tehran Codex, and we now have both of which go back to pseudo-Aristotle. We have one other kind of collection that also goes back to pseudo-Aristotle, and that is short excerpts from the collection that's preserved in its completest extant form in Manisa, Manisa Codex. Such excerpts exist in perhaps dozens of manuscripts, at least dozens by my count. One example is shown here on the screen, a manuscript from Princeton. And one note to keep in mind is that nearly all such short excerpts are extant in quite late manuscripts, from the 15th century onwards. As far as we know, there aren't. If there are extant early manuscripts, there certainly are not many. And I can say more. I can say more about such collections if we have time at the end. Okay. Also, in short excerpts are the supplementary problems attributed to Pseudo-Alexander. Well, in fact, the recent editors. So let me backtrack and say that this collection of Problemata were known among scholars as the Problemata Inedita because they were not published in Becker's Editio Princeps of the Pseudo-Aristotelian Problemata. They were later published in a rather incremental manner in the mid to late 19th century, and the attribution became a subject of debate. The collection was most recently edited and translated to English in 2006. And the editors and translators there suggested that they no longer be referred to as Problemata Inedita, but rather as supplementary problems, because, well, by now they've been edited and published 3 or 4 times. Moreover, they argued that there's not enough evidence to strongly favor attributing this set of Problemata to Aristotle or to Alexander, and rather prefer a neutral attribution. This what is extant of this tradition in Arabic are short excerpts, largely in the range of 15 to 20 pages, and also extant in nearly a dozen manuscripts. What is extant of the Hebrew tradition also belongs to this this line of transmission, and was probably based on the Arabic, but that's not certain. Okay, let me quickly mention that in addition to quotations and, in addition to various kinds of translations, we have extant in Arabic material that is excerpted and curated from various sources of Greek Problemata. So one example is on the screen. This is a collection attributed to a scholar by the name of Isa ibn Massa, who was also active in the 9th century. It is a collection of 37 problems, only some of which bear resemblance to the Manisa collection. A second similar compilation is attributed to Abu al-Faraj ibn Tayyib, who was active in the late 10th century, early 11th century Baghdad. In philosophy, he wrote several commentaries on the works of Aristotle, and famously on the Isagoge of Porphyry. In medicine, he wrote abridgments of Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Galen, and among his works is this little-known compilation of Problemata in Arabic that are adapted from a wide range of the ancient Greek tradition, including the Problemata attributed to Aristotle, but also those attributed to Pseudo-Alexander, and collections attributed to Theophrastus, Proclus, and Galen, many of which remain unidentified. Okay, now let's survey what we've said to be extant of the Arabic tradition. So a large collection represented in the Manisa Codex, and a standalone witness in a Tehran collection. I add to that a newly identified manuscript, which remains to be compared to the Manisa Codex. At the time that the Arabic Problemata was published, only the Manisa and Tehran collection manuscripts were known. A small collection related to the supplementary problems attributed to Pseudo-Alexander. This is not yet edited, although it is extant in dozens of manuscripts. And we have the adaptations and recensions of Isa ibn Masa and Ibn Tayyib. Now, I'd like to turn to a newly discovered collection. And if I have time at the end, I can say something about quotations and commentaries. Okay. The collection that I'm referring to is extant in 3 manuscripts. It comprises 13 problemata, 4 questions on meteorology, 4 on astronomy, 2 on geometry, 1 on wine drinking, 1 on medicine, and a final question on music. That final question being quite lengthy. 2 of the manuscripts are nearly complete. Both are held in Tehran, but at different libraries. 1 manuscript, also incidentally in Manisa, contains only the chapter on music. All 3 manuscripts explicitly attribute the text to Thabit ibn Qurra, who also was to whom also the Tehran collection was attributed. Of course, we often encounter misattributions in the manuscripts or conflicting attributions in the case of the Pseudo-Aristotelian Problemata physica in Arabic. However, I wish to offer 2 observations in favor of taking this attribution to Thabit seriously. The first observation is that from a stomatological analysis, it is clear that the 3 manuscripts we're concerned with here represent distinct lines of the text transmission history. And typically, when all extant branches of a stomma agree on something, be it a reading or an attribution, we accept it unless there is positive evidence to the contrary. In fact, in this case, the secondary evidence supports the attribution to Thabit, although in a rather limited fashion. The secondary evidence comes from the 13th century bibliographical work of Ibn Abi Usaybiya, a text entitled Uyun al-Anba. In his entry on Thabit ibn Qurra, Ibn Abi Usaybiya reports that Thabit composed a set of questions, quote, in exhortation of the sciences. And here we see the title of that the scribe has given to this work, although there is no guarantee that this is the title that Thabit, or whoever the compiler was, himself had given to the work. But nevertheless, it's worth reading since it echoes what Ibn Abi Usaybiya tells us about Thabit's work. So in this case, the text is identified as as a set of comprehensible questions and their answers composed by Thabit ibn Qurra al-Harrani. He compiled them from the sayings of Aristotle and others, and through them he intended to stimulate those who endeavor to understand something of the sciences and to exhort them to study and inquiry. It is perhaps worth saying a bit more about Thabit. Originally from Harran, a town in Upper Mesopotamia, Thabit was active mostly in Baghdad and belonged to the circle of prolific and influential translators that Hunayn ibn Ishaq belonged to. Thabit translated and revised translations of a large number of mathematical, astronomical, and medical works, including those of Euclid, Archimedes, Apollonius, Nicomacheus, Ptolemy, and Galen. He also wrote many original works on various exact sciences and medicine. This collection, if we accept the attribution to Thabit, would appear to be an original composition of his, since only some of the questions posed in this collection have some correspondence to the questions that appear in the Pseudo-Aristotelian collection of Problemata, and the degree of correspondence is rather minimal. In this sense, the collection attributed to Thabit is similar to those attributed to Ibn Masa and Ibn Tayyib, that is what I've referred to as adaptations or recensions. This text is consistent with the main characteristics of the Problemata genre. Clearly, it adheres to the question and answer format. But beyond this, the collection is similar to other Problemata questions in that it is not expository or systematic in nature and scope. However, this collection differs from other similar collections in that it is comparatively short, and in that it has an expressly pedagogical and exhortative purpose. This is conveyed in how the work is introduced in the Tehran manuscript, as we see on the screen. It is also conveyed in how the compiler answers the questions. In most cases, the answer comprises two parts. In the first part, the compiler, Thabit, we're presuming, provides an answer to the question. And in the second part, mentions corollaries that follow from the answer and other questions whose answers also become clear once the main question is answered. This appears to be a distinctive practice of Thabit, as I have not observed it so far or ascension of the Arabic Problemata. In a minute, I'd like to give an example of such of how these questions work. Let me just first, since I've mentioned we have three manuscripts, just so show some clips of the three manuscripts. This is the second Tehran manuscript, a much later copy. And in this case, we have here rubricated in red ink a similar title, although it's not exactly the same as the title given in the earlier manuscript, but it does convey the exhortative and pedagogical function of this text as the other Tehran manuscript did as well. And this is the Manisa Codex containing, the Manisa manuscript containing the question on music. Okay, let's have a look at a sample question to have a sense of how Thabit answers the questions. This is the third question in the collection, and it goes like this. A question on what occurs during different seasons. Why are deep wells and cellars hot in winter and cool in summer, such that at some times of intense coldness, vapor emerges from them with a cloud of steam? The answer, summarized, goes something like this. It revolves around the mutual aversion of heat and coldness. In other words, that heat and coldness repel each other, which is was a common belief inherited from Greek science. The effect is that in summer, when heat seizes control of the air above the earth, cold escapes or hides inside the earth, and the cellars and wells are therefore cooled. The opposite occurs in winter, where cold seizes control of the atmosphere above the earth and heat escapes below into the earth. Okay, that's the gist of the answer. Then the author of this collection says that, well, if you know the answer to this question, then you also will know the answers to several other questions, such as what occurs to the faculty of digestion, such that during winter, people are able to digest heavy food that is difficult to digest, but not so in summer. Why? Well, because while the atmosphere while in winter the atmosphere is cold, then heat escapes to the gut, and so the gut is able to digest more readily. The opposite happens in summer, where the atmosphere is warmer, then the gut is cooler. Or here's another corollary, or excuse me, a secondary question. Why are people in mountainous and cold regions strong? Well, the answer to that question is actually based on the same answer. Strength is attributed to heatiness of the gut, and in mountainous and cold regions, the atmosphere is cold, the gut is hot, and so therefore people are said to be strong in mountainous and cold regions. The point is that by answering one question, you can answer 3, 4, 5 different questions, and that's the typical form of this collection, and reflects the author's exhortative purposes. The discovery of this collection shows that there still remains much to learn about the medieval Arabic reception of the ancient peripatetic traditions. In particular, this collection highlights how scholars writing in Arabic created original collections of problemata for different purposes. In this case, Thabit's aim was to pose a variety of questions that would draw the attention of readers and answer them in such a way that would demonstrate just how much one can learn through scientific inquiry. These dual pedagogical and exhortative functions mean that, unlike the extant Greek collections, which are expansive in scope and haphazard in structure, Thabit's collection is concise and coherent. Yet, insofar as Thabit's work adheres to the question-answer form and explicitly cites Aristotle and other Greek authorities, it illustrates some of the ways in which extant Greek genres of scientific writing were adapted and naturalized in the medieval Islamic world. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your very interesting and very well timed presentation. Very good, many thanks. As I suggested, we keep the questions for at the end of the session, and then we turn now online to Yang Wang.
Yeah, if you might be able to unmute and share your screen.
Yes. I would share my screen.
And Yang Wang is from.
Can everyone here see my PowerPoint?
Yang Wang from Fudan University, and the floor is yours. That makes it easier. And you will get the final when there is 5 minutes. I will
Yes.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Here in Canada, I'm Yang Wang from Fudan University, and I regret that I can only meet you online. So actually, we encounter each other from different time zones, or the chronos of sequential time, where the exchange of knowledge here in the symposium witnesses the chaos or the critical or moment of our reception and personal understanding of each talk. My presentation, indeed, here also works at such kernels and chaos of the encounter of cosmological knowledge. Specifically, it would focus on the Nebular hypothesis from both European and Chinese context in their respective sequencing. And on the encounter and its political head-to-head in Fund CX China, critical moment for understanding the transition of China and even for reflecting on its northeast influence and intellectual heritage. Here, the next point, can everyone see that? It is true that we students of French philosopher Bernard Stiegler developed a concept of cosmotechnics to his gap for the lack of reflection on scientism and accelerationism in the current society. Here, both literally and philosophically, the Nebular hypothesis is a good example to literally and comprehend his argument, in contrast to the current consideration limited to an astronomical issue of Nebular hypothesis. Kant was inspired by his earlier hypothesis to formulate his critical reflection on the human reason and on the potential recursivity of nature. And Herbert Spencer, with his contemporary development of mathematical and natural and historical approaches, utilizes this cosmogony to offer his justification of social evolution. In other words, both of them unified the moral order and cosmological understanding, which was similar to the unification of Dao and Qi in traditional Chinese cosmotechnics. Therefore, here seemingly comes a gap between now and the pre-modern Chinese in the biography of Hui in his book in 2016, he correspondingly regarded the found-select China as the rupture or collapse of techniques in his narrative of the question concerning technology in China, referring to Heidegger's book as well. However, it is the truth. I think for Yu Kui, his approach is about returning to pre-modern China to seek the unification, and with his reinterpretation of Kant and Joseph Needham to heal the contemporary gap. However, for my presentation here, the found-select China or the late 19th century China also has its own intellectual possibilities of cosmotechnics where in this critical moment of chaos, Chinese intellectuals mobilize their recent reception of Kant Nebular hypothesis through the translation of Spencer and the cosmogony in the Han Dynasty with their own philological methodology. In other words, with various theological research of space in kernels to develop their own hierarchy of politics and potential reflection on the epistemology process. Okay, in this presentation, I would select two ideal types of Chinese intellects in found-select China. That is Yan Fu and Zhang Taiyan, to demonstrate the encounter of nebular hypothesis. Both of them coincidentally published their translated book of Spencer and the Nebular Hypothesis in 1898. However, Yan Fu and Zhang Taiyan developed a respective understanding of this cosmological knowledge with different emphases and its hierarchical politic. For Yan Fu, his book in 1898 was mainly the translation of Thomas Huxley about the aesthetical process, and Yan Fu's attached comment in comparison constructs the image of Spencer as a man yielding to the cosmic process. Therefore, Yan Fu paid more attention to the superficial fact that the nuclear hypothesis was struck by Newton's universal law of gravitation, thus providing his theory of social evolution with the natural axiom. As for Zhang Taiyan, on the other hand, he has learned some astronomical knowledge from books translated by missionary at Shanghai in 1896, and his collaborator translation work, on the other hand, offered him an opportunity to comprehend the detailed process of nebular hypothesis in Spencer's book. Zhang Taiyan accordingly developed several aspects of this cosmological knowledge, that is Newton's universal law of gravitation, with emphasis on the infinite isomorphic mechanism, the isoatom system, and the isomorphic mechanism, all of which contributed to his correspondingly hierarchical of politics and his later intellectual transition. The encounter of nebular hypothesis indeed was not just represented as a reception of its original knowledge structure, such as a seemingly opposed reception of Kant and of different approaches to hypothesis, but also reformulated by the intellectual mobilization in found-select China. Since the understanding of space in chaos in found-select China also forms its own theory on the hierarchy of space in chaos, we have to focus on chaos in such kernels. That is, Zhang Taiyan's translation of Spencer's Spencer's book, Progress, its law and course, especially two paragraphs in different trends of social evolution. The figure below briefly shows the generative process in the nebular hypothesis. From the nearly homogeneous medium in the beginning, the Nebular hypothesis masses were gradually condensed into the sun in the center, and several planets in various orbits. In Spencer's work, he utilized the cos- cosmogony twice for his chain of social evolution based on different emphasis on Nebular hypothesis. For the first chain, Spencer focused on the transmission from the nearly homogeneous medium to differentiation of all attributions in the forming process, thus referring to the social differentiation in the process of evolution. And for the second chain, Spencer emphasized on the isomorphic mechanism of select tissue bodies. For example, the Saturn's rings of the moon is to Saturn's of the Earth, and the Saturn's of the Earth is to the Sun. And as the solar system is to other celestial bodies. In other words, all of them will balance the consequence of centripetal and centrifugal forces. Such centripetal and centrifugal forces were developed from Newton's universal law and gravitation, referring to the hidden power of the universal in the process of social evolution. Apart from these two chains, John Tyen's translation provide another entrance to this progress, to the nuance and transformed emphasis could reveal John's reception and mobilization of Nebular hypothesis. Therefore, the following slides juxtapose three clues above as one of the detailed example of close reading in my paper. At the beginning of both chains, Spencer describes the homogeneous states of nebular medium. In comparison, the hypothetical dimension of the nebular hypothesis was emphasized in the second chain. John Tyen's translation linked the nebular masses to the Chinese medium qi, which was related to his seek for a Chinese origin for the Western learning in that early phases. And in the following part of the first chain, Spencer paid attention to the homogeneous medium at the beginning of Nebular in comparison with the differential in the forming process, while the second chain omitted this phase, which corresponded to in John's part, which corresponded to the purpose of the social differentiation in the first chain, and it was a molecule, not atom, that John Tyen utilized to refer to the nebular masses, which was further related to John's personal system of as a molecular atom as an early attempt to construct a universal epistemology in 1899. Uh, Similarly, in the following two sentences, the second chain was attached great importance to the hidden force in the process of forming, contributed to Spencer's further development of the hidden power of social evolution. And the later one, especially emphasized on the heat of the sun, was associated with Zhang Taiyan's version of Genesis in notes in 高兰市 in 1898 as his reflection on religion. Both chains in the next part explained the orbiting process in comparison with the condensed sun in the center. Not surprisingly, the first chain focuses on the transmission of quality, while the second one continues the explanation of the force. Therefore, this isomorphic mechanism of celestial bodies correspondingly was represented in the similar structure of Saturn's ring and Saturn, the Moon and the Earth, or further structure of the Sun and other attractive celestial bodies. In this infinitive chance of isomorphic mechanism, it seems that the genesis is also an infinite chain, which was developed by Zhang Taiyan in his further reflection on religion in 1899. For here, this sentence is quite important to highlight John's role in translation process, since both chains in Spencer's original text didn't included this part. John's additional translation here indeed was not a groundless supplement, but a further development of the isomorphic mechanism above. Because the previous sentence utilized the current observation of the certain string as evidence of forming process and its mechanism. John's complemented the astronomical experience with the potential inaccuracy caused by the atmospheric reflection. The epistemological process of astronomy, especially with the hypothetical dimension emphasis in the beginning part of the second train, served as John's potential resources for his later translation. And the last two sentences repeat the respective emphasis of each train, such as the differential in the first train and Spencer's summary for translating to the first step of evolution. We just stop here, since the sentence mentioned above in the John's translation above are able to represent the John's reception and his intellectual resources. So here comes the some brief summary. Since the emphasis of each sentence had developed further clues of John's early or late intellectual phases, here we just return to the three potential aspects of Nebular hypothesis mentioned above. For the aspect of Newton's law of gravitation, Yanfu directly utilizes the universal law of gravitation in the forming process as the metaphor of social evolution. Such Halifax developed from Nebular hypothesis was quite coordinated with the writing styles of his book in 1988. For example, the state of natural Tianyun, cosmic process Tianyin and selection Tianze. All the expressions started with the traditional Chinese Rhetoric of heaven. Such Rhetoric with the social theory of evolution attracted a great number of Yan's contemporary readers. In comparison, also Zhang Taiyan's translation and further reflection were based on the aspect of Newton's law of gravitation as well. He changed his emphasis on corresponding phenomena to develop his Rhetoric of isomorphic mechanism. In other words, Zhang made the universal law of gravitation unique to point out the reflexivity of any system or knowledge. Indeed, John's reflection on religion and science contributed to his contemporary political discourse. However, it seems that the reflexivity was opposed to the belief of the social evolutionists, who tended to superficially replace the moral faith with a belief in science, such as their understanding of ether as a universal medium of limited communication. Zhang Taiyan naturally was not well understood by his contemporaries. And for the aspect of the atmospheric reflection, the emphasis on the observatory inaccuracy was similar to the reflexivity on the epistemological process in the first aspect here. For the clues of knowledge reception, Zhang Taiyan was inspired by the telescope before he encountered Spencer's book, and for the clues of intellectual reflection. If also selecting the topic on space in time, Zhang's development of Lowell's Martin's kernel witnessed a similar transition from the Halifax about the isomorphic chains of extraterrestrial lives, who construct kernels in Mars, to the explanation of epistemic process, since Martian kernel was just a result of misperception. In conclusion, for the studies of Zhang Taiyan's encounter of Nebular hypothesis provided Zhang with the emphasis on the epistemological process, showing his affinities and translation to Yugakara school. In comparison, Pen Chunling's and analysis similarly focused on the fundamental influence of Newton's law on John's science thinking, thus confusing John's emphasis with Yanfu's Rhetoric on the universal law. Indeed, the encounter is a two-way process. In other words, John's translation based on the Nebular hypothesis could function as a key to understanding Kantian thinking, since John's emphasis on the epistemological process was similar to Kant's Copernican revolution. Such encounter of cosmotechnics in fantasy like China, if we go back to Yuki's structure at the beginning of my presentation, provided us with another entrance to seek further intellectual possibilities at the intersection between history of science and intellectual history. Okay, that's all I want to share in the point. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask here or contact me via email. Many thanks.
Many thanks. We have a quarter of an hour for discussion or questions. And I don't know how it works when we want to ask a question to Jan. How should we do that?
I mean, you can hear us through the speakers. Can you hear us right now? Yep. And so also people online, if you want to ask a question, you can type it in chat and I'll read it out loud, or you can also raise your hand virtually and I'll call on you to unmute yourself and ask the question through the speakers.
That's great. And I suggest that we have questions to both Eshera and Wang. Who has a question?
About solid text that thank you very much for your presentation. And my question is just, you said that solid text contains topics like music, astronomy, and physics. How the distribution of topics in the pseudo-Aristotelian text was we see the same pattern there?
Yes, the pseudo-Aristotelian texts cover an even wider range of topics, and within each topic, the arrangement is somewhat haphazard. We might have different number of questions dedicated to each topic, or let me say non-uniform. Although there is really a sense of disorganization to the corpus. But yes, it covers the Greek traditions also cover wide-ranging topics broadly within natural philosophy, mathematics, music, different ethics. That we don't have something on ethics in this newly discovered text, but there's quite a bit on ethics in the Problemata as well. And maybe then it's better to just call it Problemata and the physica.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was quite interesting. There were all these manuscripts, Problemata, physica. Had the impression when I came that they were about physics, but it's a bit broad. It covers a lot of things. But from what you said, I may have misunderstood you. Okay, that these texts are attributed to a pseudo-Aristotle, and that the collection that was newly discovered is attributed to Tabit ibn Quran. So we don't really know who these texts really belong to. Okay, that's one problem, but that's okay because they are discussing these problems in physics and they are saying, well, attributing it to Aristotle, Tabit ibn Quran, so as to give it some authoritative value. But on the other hand, when you think of Aristotle, you think of that he talks in terms of those different types of cause-effect linkages. You know, there are these different causes, formal causes, material causes, final causes, efficient causes, and so on. Now, do these texts actually appeal to these kinds of thinking? And is that also similar to the way Aristotle thought about hotness and coldness, goes sinking in different times? Is that how he actually thought? You know, I'm not really familiar with Aristotle, so I have to specialize in that. My area is early modern science. So, but is that actually a continuation of the Aristotelian tradition?
Okay, I mean, these are great questions. So just to take them in turn, about the attribution, the ancient Greek collections are referred to as pseudo-Aristotle because because the manuscripts have sort of contradicting attributions. But in general, and because the secondary evidence about Aristotle's compositions don't support heavily attributing what is extent as this collection to Aristotle. In the case of Thabit's text, the evidence is stronger to weigh in favor of attributing to Thabit because we have both concrete evidence in manuscripts as well as secondary evidence, and we rely also on we give preference to that positive evidence, positive claims made by a set of manuscripts. But at some level, there is always a degree of doubt or uncertainty about attribution. That said, the text of Thabit's is not really aiming to provide demonstrative arguments or proofs. So the discussion about heat escaping, heat and coldness being mutually repulsive, and heat escaping to the earth, or coldness escaping to during winter, and then coldness to the earth during summer. It's a sort of exhortative discussion. It's to try to entice the reader to then go on and actually read natural philosophy and take up the more complete discussions of these topics. But in terms of causality in general, yes, in broad strokes, scientists and philosophers like Thabit and his contemporaries very much adopted the broad features of Aristotelian causality. Then, of course, there's debates about philosophical debates on that, but the broad features are maintained.
Additional questions? That may be from my side. One question to you and one question to Jan. And you mentioned that this Problemata physica has the format of sort of phenomenon and sort of an explanation, and for all the phenomena which actually don't have also other characteristics. And my question is about the newly discovered one. I can imagine that in the Glorious you mentioned that you come up also with new phenomena which have not been addressed in the original. So my question is it not only an adaptation or an accommodation of answers, but there's also new phenomena?
Yes, absolutely. Since this is still an ongoing project, I should qualify that we're still trying to make sure. So, the 13 questions in the new text, that's easy to sort of organize. But then we have this massive corpus of ancient questions that we still need to sort of make sure to try to map the new questions onto the old ones. But so far, your observation is correct. They're asking fresh questions as well. And even and for existing answers, for existing questions that are inherited from the Greek tradition, providing new answers as well.
Okay, many thanks. Then a question to Yang, and I'm absolutely not an expert on the Nebular hypothesis, but my question is, when you are discussing this Chinese adaptations and translations by Zhang of Herbert Spencer's literature, Herbert Spencer's literature is also very much an educational one, and it is also very much engaged with popularization. And I wonder whether you can elucidate to what extent this Chinese translations differ, particularly in, let's say, the educational aspects and effects of the interpretation from Spencer's original.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I would share my screen again to emphasize one of the key points here. It is okay.
Shall I repeat it? Or
yes.
yeah, it's my question is about the let's say the educational perspective and the educational aims of Spencer's publications, and to what extent these are actually respected in Zhang's translations, or to what extent the, let's say, the educational characteristics and particularly aims of the original text are respected or not.
Yes. For Yan Fu's work, he would emphasize on the point of Kant's system. He would emphasize more on the aspects about the Newton's law of universal gravities. So he wanted to think about the Nebular hypothesis as the universal principles of natural phenomena and even to the political system, so the Western system can easily transplant or easily received in the modern China. And for Zhang Taiyan, he would emphasize more on the the reflection of the atmosphere. So our astronomical observation was quite inaccurate. So it was cannot reflect the exact phenomena of the world. So we just need to reflect the universal principle of from the Western world. So here is Zhang Taiyan's the aim on the philosopher or on the education.
Thank you very much. Then, if there are no further questions, then I have a slightly extended break, and then I would like to thank the presenters, Osama and Yang, for giving the talk. And thank you for your support. Many thanks. So that's
Great.
what we'll see the follow-up in half an hour.
Bye, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now. Great. Thank you very much.